You focus on fueling right, staying hydrated, getting enough sleep, mobility, recovery, all the things to optimize your performance. But what if I told you that there's something sneaking into your system that you didn't even sign up for? Something tiny, something microscopic, yet potentially harmful. What on earth am I talking about? I'm talking about microplastics. You've probably heard about plastic pollution in the ocean, but did you know that tiny plastic particles have now been found in human blood, in our organs, and even in the air that we breathe? Now, as triathletes, we are constantly consuming fluids, sports nutrition products, and spending time in environments where microplastics are. So, what does that mean for our health and our recovery and ultimately our performance? To help us understand this growing issue and something I'm quite personally interested in myself, and I also know that my Triathlon Nutrition Academy athletes are interested in this topic, I've invited one of the world's leading researchers on microplastics, Dr. Heather Leslie, to join me. Her groundbreaking research has uncovered these tiny contaminants in human blood. She is a Canadian living in Amsterdam for the last 30 years. See if you can pick her accent. She's an independent consultant and researcher and can play 5 instruments. Like, talk about high achiever. In this episode, we're going to unpack what microplastics are and how they make their way into our bodies. What does that actually mean for our health and performance as endurance athletes? And most importantly, what can we do to reduce our exposure? Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Leslie.
Thank you very much. You can call me Heather.
Okay, I'll do that. Now, I know a lot of listeners are probably wondering if they've clicked on the right podcast right now. Like, this is a Triathlon Nutrition podcast. What on earth is Darren talking about? But as a dietitian, long-term health is one of my key values and a big focus of mine, along with lots of performance gains that we talk about on the podcast specifically for triathlon. But I really love to educate people on all things health. And as triathletes, we use gels that are wrapped in plastic, sports drinks that come in plastic bags or plastic bottles. There's plastic bottles that you get handed out on the bike course and plastic cups that we drink from, and they bake all day in the sun. They could be out there for 12 hours cooking in liquids that you consume and gels that you consume at all those aid stations. And they probably haven't even considered their exposure risk. So I would love you to kick us off. You're way smarter than me. This is a topic that I only know a micro bit about. What on earth is microplastics for those that are new to the topic?
Yeah, microplastics are little tiny shreds of plastic, and they are coming off of our plastic stuff. And they're very, very diverse because our plastic stuff is diverse. If you look around your room right now, wherever you are, you'll see a lot of things made of plastic, devices, your textiles, things you're wearing, things that are in the furniture or on the floor. I mean, plastic has been the design choice. It's the answer to every design question pretty much these days. So there's a lot of different sources of them. And microplastics are really, really hard to see without really advanced equipment, microscopes, and sometimes not even microscopes can see them. You have to get even more advanced equipment to see these things. But they're there, and we found out a way to measure them. Once they're released from your products, they go into the air and all sorts of other places. So they're really going on a big journey.
And why do we need to be concerned about them? Why is it another thing that we need to worry about in life?
Yeah, and I don't want to make people too concerned that they get into fear. That's one thing I think is really important in this whole thing is not to be afraid, because that's really bad for your body. And also, you don't really make great decisions when you're afraid. But I think it's really good to be conscious of all these things. And so that's really one of my things about it. I don't want people to panic, but I want them to be aware of things. And once you listen to this podcast, I think you'll look at the world a little bit differently. You'll look at your stuff a little bit differently, and you'll look at your behavior a little bit differently. And you won't change overnight, but you could just take small steps, especially the new things that you're going to add, the new things you're going to buy. When you buy a product, you're voting for it, sort of, and also accepting the consequences of using that product. So when you're talking about plastics, it seems like an inert substance, and we're very, very used to it. We don't even think about things that they're actually plastic. Plastics are really complex materials because they have a polymer in them. That's how we know them, like polyethylene or polystyrene or something with poly in the beginning. That means it's a polymer. So that's kind of like the spaghetti of these long chains. And then you also have the sauce, which are the chemicals that go into these materials that give it its functionality. Like they make it squishy, or they make it hard, or they make it resistant to ultraviolet breakdown, or many different things that these chemicals do. And it's really surprising, even to me, as a chemist and ecotoxicologist, that plastics producers need to put so many chemicals in a single product. And then there's like over 9,000 different products, and each product, starting plastic material products, and they contain hundreds of different chemicals in each material. And so this makes it a real cocktail of different things. And some of the things won't be harmful to you, but there are some that are really concerning that we already have on our radar. And so that makes plastics really difficult to talk about in a simplified way, because we're talking about a huge array of chemicals. And then we're talking about the microplastics, which are particles, which are little packages of these chemicals that are carriers that bring these chemicals into our body when we inhale them or swallow them.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm really excited to do some educating of our listeners of what this whole topic is about.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing what that is. Your biggest research in this space is around how we can quantify this in the human body. Can we take a step back from that and talk about how they actually enter our body?
Yeah, so we know that they're all over the place. They're in your vacuum cleaner. You've sucked them up from your floor. You open your jar of honey, which I did once at my work when somebody asked me to measure microplastics in honey. I took the jar that was on my desk that I sometimes use to make lunch with, and I looked at that. There's a kaleidoscope of little particles in there, just different colors, actually beautiful in some way.
Is this under a microscope or with the naked eye?
Yeah, under a microscope.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Jesus, what honey are you eating?
They can come in through our food. We can breathe them in. And so just by using products that are made of plastic, there's microplastics are shedding off of them. So we have them in our indoor air, especially indoor air, or next to roads where we have a lot of particles coming off of tires, which are also made of plastic. So it just kind of depends where you are. You also have sometimes occupational exposures. If you work with a lot with textiles, there's a lot of dust around. So in our homes, that's where it's mostly concentrated, because that's where all the plastic is mostly concentrated. That's where our sheets, our clothes, our upholstery, our carpeting. We have in our kitchens, we have a lot of plastic. We have plastic containers. We heat stuff up sometimes in plastic, or as you said, plastic lined paper cups. They look eco-groovy, but they're not really, because there's this polyethylene lining in them. You put hot liquids in, that's just encouraging chemicals to come into your tea or coffee. So there's many, many, many different exposure routes. Basically, if you use it, it's interacting with your body, either the chemicals or the little shreds of microplastics that are coming off.
Oh, that's crazy. It kind of is a little bit overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah, it is, but it's good to keep grounded, and also feel like there's something I can do about it. Here in the Netherlands, the Public Health Institute has done all these studies about how much we eat, and you probably know how much the average person in your country eats, being a dietitian. But here it's like around 3 kilos a day. Around a third is food, and 2/3 is drinks. And if you over a lifetime, that's like 90 tons maybe of food and drinks that we're consuming. And that's something that we are responsible for. It's not just what somebody else puts in the air, or, these are decisions that we're making ourselves. So if we're conscious of what we want to eat and drink, we can just do it. It's really not that easy, because we're in a system, and it's very hard to change our eating habits in a system when we're being advertised all sorts of things, and we see other people consuming different things. But yeah, if you kind of get aligned with what makes you really happy, what makes you feel like you're doing what you want to do for your body, and not what the external world is telling you to do for your body. And so if you can align with that, and then you can figure out, if I want to reduce my microplastics exposure by what I'm consuming, then I obviously can just go ahead and do that stepwise. It's not easy to change into new habits, but it is possible.
Yeah. Amen, sister. Amen.
Yeah.
So you listed off some of those common things there, but do we know what the main exposure sites or sources are for the general population of microplastics?
Well, I would say it's what we call a diffuse source. It's not like a point source. And that is making the whole issue kind of complicated. If it was just one chemical, we could zoom in and clean that up. But this is so diffuse. It's so many different products in our day to day. And they all have their own, special fingerprints of which chemicals are in there. And also, even if you know what's in there today, they could reformulate it based on
Yeah.
market prices or just updating product lines to do something else. And there are some types of products like food and drinks and cosmetics where they have to put the ingredients on the labels, and there you're a little bit more powerful because you actually know what's in there. With other products, it's not so clear. It's very non-transparent. Even sometimes for the brands who are selling you the product, they don't even really know from further upstream in the production process what actually went into these products. So there's a lot of unknowns in this, and it's kind of important to navigate and not need without needing to know all the really high resolution details about everything, but just to work with what you do know. And that's important. When you know something and you want to use it, just you can go ahead and use it. And so with the cosmetics and the food, you can actually kind of look at the ingredients. You can see how they're packaged, and that's where you can start.
Do you think, thinking about the triathlete population, that they have, gels in packaging, like everything comes in a plastic package, really. There's nothing that doesn't. I can't think of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And they use plastic cups out on aid stations. They get given water bottles that are like a harder plastic, but they do sit in the sun all day.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think is any particular specific risk for us as a triathlon population for their microplastic exposure?
Yeah, well, those are things that you just mentioned. And for example, if you have plastic out in the sunshine, plastic and sunshine don't really go together very well. That's why for things that are supposed to be in the sunshine, like, I don't know, outdoor furniture or, the decks of boats and things like that are going to be in the sunshine a lot, they're going to have UV stabilizers in there, which are also toxic when they leach out. But depending, if it's food contact products, there is an effort and there is a special kind of regulation of what they can and cannot put in there. The regulations don't fully protect human health. So you can be fully compliant with regulations, but still environment and human health are not fully protected. That's also kind of a hard message, but it is true. And we should take that on board. That means more self-responsibility. So for triathletes, there's some particular exposure routes from using bottled water, that's especially bottles that have been in the sunlight. So there's UV radiation that starts to break down these water bottles. And there was a study, I think last year or the year before, where they found close to 250,000 nanoplastic particles in a liter of bottled water that was in a plastic bottle. And that was a real shocking amount. And I was called, for a professional comment on that study. And I thought, gee, do you really need a toxicologist to tell you, don't drink that? Just think about it for yourself.
Yeah.
And I mean, it seems like a no-brainer that you wouldn't want that. And we're at the stage in history where we don't know with a high resolution what all this stuff does to you. But it just doesn't even feel right. And that's not a very scientific thing to say, but scientists have feelings too, and we have our opinions. And I'm certainly one of those. So it just doesn't feel right to be adding a substance that we're just starting to learn how to measure them. It's just like in the infancy of this technology to measure them. They're very difficult to measure because they can be, 6 orders of magnitude from tiny nanometer size to, something that will fit through a blood sampling tube or needle, let's say. And so, there's this huge size range of particles and all these different chemistries. So it's very difficult to really quantify all this and then to translate what you find into a human health effect later. There's a lot of uncertainties along the way, and we're just starting out. So I think it's important to be using things like the precautionary principle. Like when there's a signal like this might not be cool, let's see if we can just reduce our exposure. And the fun thing about that is you have to get a little creative and be a little bit more individualistic and go your own way, because the masses are just going to be buying what the advertising says you need to buy. And it takes a little bit of discernment to figure out, what do I really want to buy that? Do I really want to drink this bottled water that's been out in the sun in 30 degrees for God knows how long?
Yeah.
And just making these decisions and realizing you can make a decision, because a lot of us are under the impression that we can't make a decision and that we need, I don't know, the UN to sort it out. I mean, they're gonna be the last ones to sort these things out. I mean, they're gonna after all of the whole population has changed over and all the companies have died out who didn't want to change, and all the new companies that are bringing great products on the market, after they're blossoming, then finally the regulators will say, okay, well, I guess we can regulate this now because nobody's going to push back against the regulation. So yeah, I'm really into making decisions for yourself. And so I think with this podcast, you'll figure out that there are problems with plastic in sunshine, and choosing plastic for every packaging solution. There's other materials out there that we can certainly use. It requires what we call functional substitution. So you want to have the function, like you need to be hydrated. But is there only one choice when you want to be hydrated? Does that have to come from a plastic bottle on the side of the road? Or is there another way we can provide hydration? And we just use our human ingenuity and our creativity, and we'll come up with loads and loads of fit for purpose solutions that reduce our exposure. And again, if you don't feel like reducing your exposure, you don't have to. Nobody's forcing you to. But if it really resonates with you, like, yeah, I've wanted this for a long time and I just never took this first step. Yeah, you can just choose to take that first step.
Yeah, I would love to get into some of that practical stuff. We're going to brainstorm together a little bit later how we might go about hydrating triathletes on a race course. Maybe we have to hand them glass bottles instead of plastic. But before we do that, I'm very much a practitioner and I'm like, let's go straight to the practical. But before we do that, what are some of the health implications and potential health effects of microplastics in the human body?
So our study a couple of years ago showed microplastics in the human bloodstream for the first time. And that was a big technical challenge, but also a bit disappointing when we actually did find them in there.
Yeah.
Because that's the river of life. It's a wonderful, I've worked with blood in our lab, measuring flame retardants in there, which are other things that leach out of plastic, and now the microplastics. And it was a bit disappointing to actually be able to find so much plastic in the bloodstream. And since then, the studies have been repeated and we're still finding that. So I'm pretty convinced we did a lot of quality control in that. And if it's in your bloodstream, it's also in all of your organs, because where does blood go? It goes everywhere. It nourishes your entire body. But just the blood vessels themselves are very important, because they're noticing, if you've got enough sugar in there, they're noticing the nutrients passing by. I have new respect for blood vessels because they're so intelligent, and these cells that line the blood vessels are real sensors for what's going on. And then we've got microplastics coming by, and they're clogging up these blood vessels, like the very small blood vessels. And you really don't want small blood vessels to get inflamed. And that is the thing that really shocked me as a scientist, coming at it from a little bit different angle than a healthcare professional. But when I found out that these particles, and we know that from called fiber and particle toxicology, that particles really can elicit a toxic effect through inflammation. And even if our body can get rid of some of these particles, which I'm sure our bodies can, but they just don't do it as fast as we're swallowing them back into our bodies, so the rate that we can get rid of them is not equal to the rate that we're absorbing them again.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a constant dose that we're getting. And that's concerning, because you don't want an inflammation to get chronic, because every doctor I speak to will reassure me that chronic inflammation is really a prelude to chronic diseases. And even in recent years, they've talked about inflammation in the brain being an instigator of neuropsychiatric diseases, like Parkinson's and dementia can even come from inflammations of the brains. And now we know that microplastics can cross the blood-brain barrier, and it's not proof that if you eat so much microplastics, you will get this disease. But it's sort of a signal that's a bit in your face that, yeah, it's a risk. We know it's plausible, but we can't quantify that risk at this point in science.
Yeah.
It's something that I feel really requires the precautionary principle, which is when you see a signal, you should probably start to reduce your exposure if you really want to be at the top of your game in terms of health. That's the concern from finding these microplastics, which contain little chemicals. Sometimes we call them Trojan horses because they can come in, and then in your body, they can also release the chemicals they're carrying, which we're also getting just because they off gas off of our stuff, and we can breathe them in. Or eat them if it's in our food system.
That's crazy. I was reading a paper where they found microplastics in the placenta of unborn babies, and you're like, my God, like, what are we doing to our children? There's a
that
big
goes
doctor
through the
here.
placenta.
Yeah.
We also measured them in amniotic fluid, and that's really, you're born polluted basically. And there's a famous study of umbilical cord blood that showed in umbilical cords, which is delivering mother's blood to the babies. They screened it for hundreds of chemicals. It's a huge analytical study, and they really find our bodies are a reflection of our stuff and our chemicals that we're using. So you can't really tell a chemical, okay, I'm going to make you stay right here, because chemicals just don't understand English. They just they go wherever they feel like going. And according to their chemistry, makes them sometimes want to go to the water phase. They want to dissolve in water, but sometimes they would rather dissolve in something less watery, like your adipose tissue or something like that. And so, they really have their own little personalities that makes them travel and accumulate in certain places. So, you don't really want to add extra chemicals that you can avoid, because we already are exposed by things that we have little control over to a lot of chemicals. So eating them and drinking them less can only be helpful to our bodies to reduce the whole toxic load.
I feel like I should have done more for my little people. I feel a little bit guilty, and I eat pretty well.
Don't feel guilty.
It's just, you go.
I just think I always want to interrupt people who say I feel guilty or I feel bad or I feel afraid, because those are really not feelings that are going to help you going further. We make our decisions based on what we know while we're making the decision, and you're doing your best. And I made a lot of mistakes, and I'm still making them, but I'm slowly changing as I learn more, and as I'm, I look at this with a lot of curiosity. Oh, that's interesting. I made this choice before. Now I wouldn't do that because I have new knowledge, and I don't beat myself up about it. And the worst thing you can do is to be perfect, because it's really annoying and you're never going to be satisfied. And it's just not also good for your health to always be trying to overdo things. There's a beauty in moderation. At the extremes, you become a sort of caricature. You'll be known as that one who is so militant in anti-plastics, and actually secretly wears a polar fleece sometimes, because she's got an old polar fleece in her closet. So you don't want to be that person, and you don't want to go into these low consciousness feelings of guilt, shame, or fear, because it's really bad for your health and your spirit, I would say.
So do you have to watch what you wear in public now because you are the face of microplastic research?
Yeah, well, I do tend to think about it, especially when I'm coming on a podcast. I'm wearing something wool and something cotton. But I did get out my polar fleece, and I know an activist here in Amsterdam who's quite famous, Maria Westerbos. She works at the Plastic Soup Foundation. And she said once she went to a shop and they gave her a plastic bag, and she walked out of the shop and some TV camera was there and said, "Aha, I've got you with your plastic bag." But I mean, we laugh about that because sometimes you can't help it. I've argued with people in shops. No, I don't want a bag. No, please have a plastic bag. They consider it part
Yeah.
of the service, and you end up like, I can argue with them, or I can just take the plastic bag. So you can't be too strict with these things. I mean, the universe is messy, and that's a good thing.
Yes, I get judged for food choices I make when I'm out, or if I bump into somebody that I know in the grocery store, they look in my trolley. I'm like, stop it. I'm a human as well. I'm a real person.
Yeah, judging other people for what they are doing is not even good for us, and it's just, yeah, it's mostly an ego thing. Like, hey, I caught you doing this, so that makes me a little
Yeah.
bit better than you, and we
Yeah.
just don't want to go there. Everybody's making their way and doing their best, and they're making decisions with the information that they have, and it's very based on a lot of emotions, except the only thing that I think we don't realize is how much advertising does to us, and how much that convinces us to buy stuff that we don't really need and we don't really want, but we think we're supposed to have it. And that's the tricky one, because it's kind of, it's stealthy and we don't really realize it. I mean, but awareness of that it can happen to you, like 700 times a day, we see brands, and it's pretty hard to shut that off unless you
Mm.
go on a sailboat across the ocean, like one of my students did. And she said, I didn't think about it for 2 months.
Oh, it sounds
And
amazing. Sign me
she
up.
got on land. Yeah, she got it back on land, and she started to feel like bad about herself. And she's like, I should wear makeup, and but she didn't do it all on the boat going across the ocean. But yeah, so we are really sensitive to those kinds of signals. But just finding out who you are and being that person really authentically, without needing information from the external world, and just letting anybody who's judging you just deflect that all off of you, and you don't really need that, and it's better for
Yeah.
that person too if they're not encouraged to judge.
This is like a side psych session with a side of microplastics. I'm loving it.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
here for
yeah,
it.
yeah, the
So
microplastics
triathletes,
theme.
triathletes definitely get marketed to a lot, and you can go on, like, there's a big website called The Feed that's got all these different sports nutrition products on it, and you see something new, and there's always order bumps in your cart and things like that. So yeah, as a population of people, I think triathletes get faced with a lot of that marketing messaging as well. So how do we reduce our exposure? Like, what are some of the big things or easy wins that somebody could walk away from listening to this podcast, wherever they are? What are they doing? What are some things that we could change, like today or tomorrow, to get some, runs on the board, some quick wins? And then maybe what are some things that are more of a longer term, thinking about, overhauling your entire wardrobe today, but
Yeah,
some easy, fast things, and then maybe some bigger picture things that we could do to
yeah,
reduce our exposure of microplastics.
yeah. One thing I don't think we should do is just empty out our homes and throw out everything in our closet and all of our furniture.
That's not good
You
for the
know,
environment either.
That's not good either. So wear your stuff, wear it out. And when you're going to buy something new, that's a decision making time. And you can inform yourself about what you think is also acceptable in terms of a product performance. And sometimes, you're going to have I don't know what they call them. I don't really like the term, but guilty pleasures. Just like not being too strict with yourself. I mean, you want to do everything you can for your performance, right? So you really don't want to cut any corners. And I really understand that. But at a decision making point, you can just weigh all of your options and see if you can make some decisions that will improve your performance of your body. Because after all, we're talking about our bodies, and we don't want them to be assaulted by chemicals and microplastics, because that's also bad for our performance in the long run.
Mm.
So things like textiles, it's, when we were growing up, we were wearing cotton t-shirts, and now we're being sold these nylon t-shirts that
Mm.
leach a lot of stuff out of them that our skin can absorb. And a colleague of mine here in the Netherlands was testing nylon with lung cells, and she just added little shreds of nylon to a medium where lung cells were growing in. And the lung cells didn't want to do their job anymore when they got the
Fair
nylon.
enough.
And they were just like, no, that's it. We're done. Get that out of here. We don't want to grow. And having lung cells not doing their job, not growing with it the way they're supposed to, that's a little concerning. So I don't want to really increase the amount of nylon fibers that I'm inhaling. So maybe I can do the same activity instead of having some sort of nylon supersonic. thing that was sold to me, I might be able to do the same job with cotton. We're talking about looking for the function. It's not necessarily that we need this plastic, but we need to have this function. We need to keep the sun off of us, and we need something to whisk away sweat, which cotton does, which linen does. Linen is also an amazing product. And it has very good properties to it. I really want to myself buy more linen. You can do lots of exercises in wearing linen, nice baggy stuff, and probably not for your triathlon athletes.
Cycling.
Cycling, not so good. So maybe you can't really replace that, but other things you can. Maybe the underwear underneath can also be a cotton underwear instead of it's synthetic. These are things that we can think about. One of the big things, I think, is what we consume. So the water that you're consuming when you're training, you're not always in a race. Maybe in a race, you just have to go with what the race wants. You could talk to the people who organize the race and say, I'd like to have filtered water and I don't want it in a plastic bottle.
Good luck getting that past Ironman.
Yeah. But you never know. Maybe in 15 years, Ironman is like, I can't believe we used to do that. It's just raising awareness of people who are doing it. And the other thing is that not all athletes are going to be on board with this. They're going to say, you only live once. I don't want to change this. This is working for me. And that's okay too. But if you really want to change it for yourself, you have to look into how to change it. Do you really want to be having with every liter of bottled water a couple 100,000 micro and nanoplastics? I mean, those are really absorbable in your body. If it's less than 10 micrometers in diameter, it goes right into through your gut. It's a very thin layer in your gut, and it's supposed to be there for absorbing food particles, but you can really fool it into absorbing a nanoplastic particle too. So do you want that? Or would you rather have clean water that's filtered the way nature does it? I often say, which makes my friends laugh, trust nature and don't trust a chemist. And they're like, yeah, but you are a chemist. I said, yeah, but trust nature more.
Yeah.
When we're opening up these packages, there's a protein bar in there, but you could also eat protein in your kitchen that's got natural protein in it, and it doesn't have a lot of additives in it. There could be extra bonuses, and some things can be even better in ways that we didn't expect, because you're cooking more whole foods, which are fresher, and there's more good energy in the fresh food than something that's going to expire in 2027 if it's in 2 years from now.
Yeah.
So you have to think about the freshness of food. It might kick you off into eating more fresh food if you're not eating everything that's packaged. And if you're eating protein the way nature made it, how could that be wrong?
Yeah, I agree. I'm constantly beating my head against a brick wall trying to get people to eat more fruits and vegetables and things that look like they came out of the ground rather than from a package. I would love to see Ironman take on different sorts of ways to give athletes water, but I'm fairly sure it's just from the hose in somebody's yard in a huge big vat. There is no filtered water coming onto the race course. But is there any, thinking through the practicalities of that, is there any thicker plastics, or is there anything that somebody could switch to? The only option I can think of is glass, but there's no way you'd want to race on a bike at 40 k's an hour with a glass water bottle. Is there anything that exists at this point? It might be something that comes in the future.
Yeah, plastic always wins when it's about the lightweight. There are a lot of companies that are starting they hear podcasts like this, and they hear, media reports, and they hear scientists from time to time. And they think, I think there's a market for people who don't want to drink 250,000 nanoplastics with their bottle of water. So maybe we can come up with something. Some people are making metal, stainless steel that can be it's very strong, so it can be made thin, maybe not as quite as lightweight as plastic. So when every gram counts, especially when you're in a race, I can imagine that you'll make an exception for that. But we're talking about reduction. We can't overnight say there's no more plastic in the world. That's just not going to happen, and it would cause so much disruption that it wouldn't be even fun to live on this planet, if we suddenly overnight didn't have plastic anymore. So for some things, I can imagine you can make an exception, but if you're training, you can use a different material water bottle without affecting your performance very much, I would say. But it's up to, there's so many different scenarios that, every scenario might have a slightly different solution. I think it's just good to keep in mind what's available. There is more and more available to avoid the plastic water bottle. That's a really big one.
Yeah.
But I think
Like the
it's possible.
single-use plastic water bottle, the thin ones that sit on the shelf for years. That's the type of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, and they often don't even have really great water quality. I mean, it's sometimes just I don't know, a tap water. It's not just beautiful spring water from some clean mountain area all the time. I really avoid it because I also think that they don't taste good. My own water that I filter at home, I really prefer. But again, if I'm in a restaurant or something and they don't have that water, then I'm going to be drinking the water that there is. Or if you go to your friend's house, you can't just carry around your own water with you all the time. So you have to make exceptions, but it's about seeing where it is easy, like the low hanging fruit, let's say. Where can I skip this water? I mean, maybe when I'm in the middle of a big race, I'll make an exception. But when I'm at home, when I'm training, when I'm at the office, I'm just not going to be drinking water out of these bottles that have been sitting around for
Yeah.
months, absorbing the chemicals and these little nanoplastic particles.
And is it a time thing as well? The longer it sits in that vesicle, the more microplastics are going to leach into the water or into the food?
Yeah, I think time certainly, we call it aging of the plastic. So it slowly starts to lose its properties, that keeps it all together. It can get little fractures in it, and it can release little bits, especially, if there's sunlight involved, then it accelerates everything.
Mm.
And also, if there's heat, things go faster when it's warm, but it still
How
happens.
warm is warm? Asking for a friend because it's very hot here in the summer,
Yeah.
as it is in Amsterdam in the summer. But how warm is warm?
Well, I think I'll say with every 10-degree increase in temperature, the speed of things might double, something like that. That's like a very, very rough estimation. It modifies the rate, but it doesn't really change the overall result. If you wait a little longer,
Mm.
it's the same thing as heating it up. The age of the plastic really makes a difference. And the thing is that it never really goes away. So it's just going to crack and fracture. But in our lifetimes, it's not going to go away unless we burn it, unless it's incinerated, then the plastic will disappear. Otherwise, the the little tiny shreds can stick around for a long time. And at some point, yeah, there's nothing really linear about what plastic does. It's good for a few months. Then depending on the conditions, it'll start to show signs of wear and tear, and then things can get going really fast. Like at some certain point, the whole thing can just fall apart. I had a plastic flower pot that started. It used to be red, then it got pink, then it got white, then it was starting to look worse and worse because it was right in the sunny window. And
Yeah.
eventually you can't use it anymore, and you just tick against it, and the whole thing just falls apart into small microplastics and bigger chunks. So that's how it goes with water bottles too, and with any of our stuff that we're using, and like clothes, they start to lose fibers. So when you wash them and when
Mm.
you're exercising, and yeah, the other thing I thought about athletes, you're sweating, and that is a perfect thing when you have a sweat on your skin, then chemicals can really easily be absorbed from the textiles that you're wearing into that nice moist
Right.
area. And so I thought, yeah, it's really important what you have against your skin, like the real thing that's really next to your skin. It's hard to find things that are made from natural products that don't have
Yeah.
nasty pigments, but
How do you
yeah.
replace lycra?
Yeah, how do you replace it? Maybe you don't. It's a real challenge to engineers and designers to come up with new materials. And for sure, there are people out there who are conscious of this, and they certainly are in the textile world. I'm working with someone right now who's developing new textiles, and the textile community is aware of this, and they're really trying to reduce through all sorts of different ways, like different weaves, different fiber densities. Ways to reduce the amount of microfibers that are coming off of this stuff. But of course, then there's also the chemicals, which they're also aware of, which are also a difficult one for them. So
Mm.
there's a long road ahead. So I
Yeah, it
think
is.
as individuals, we just have to try to navigate and where we can reduce our exposure.
Yeah. And just the little things that you can do. So things that I did myself at home were get rid of all my plastic food storage containers. There's some of those that shouldn't have been in the house altogether, but switching those over for glass, not using plastic when I'm cooking. So plastic utensils for stirring hot foods. I use only wood or metal. What else? Plastic storage containers in the pantry area as well. Like there's so many of those now, and slowly switching those over to more glass, and I guess not leaving food in plastic packaging either, putting it into a glass container so that it's not sitting in that really thin plastic package for a long period of time. Is there anything else like that? Any big wins that we could do in the home?
Yeah, those are great ideas. If you don't have plastic in your home, you're not going to be shedding it, you know? So when you're making new purchases, if you can avoid purchasing things that are packaged in plastic, especially food is really difficult, cereals or rice or things like that. How do you buy that? You have to go to a place that sells things in bulk.
Yeah,
Or
we do that and have done that for a long time.
Yeah. And there's sometimes there are shops that are really conscious of that, and you could try shopping for some things that you can't buy that are unpackaged. In a regular supermarket, you can go to a shop that's really doing its best to reduce, that doesn't sell you cucumbers that are packaged in plastic, or bananas. Nature's packaging those. You don't really need extra packaging.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
There is definitely a movement away from plastic stuff. Well, particularly in Australia, plastic straws are disappearing. I saw our grapes. They used to come in these annoying plastic bags with carry holds, and they are now being produced in paper. And I saw an article of blueberries locally being packaged up in little cardboard boxes instead of those annoying plastic containers they come in. Like there's definitely a movement in that direction, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, I think so too. Food packaging, there are so many people working on that. I also have a friend who came to Amsterdam, went to a conference, and they were discussing all sorts of innovations, including those blueberry packages. That was one of her things that she worked on for many years, blueberry. Food scientists, unfortunately, she tells me that at the very end of developing a new food product, they think, oh yeah, and the packaging, because they're concerned with nutrition mostly. But yeah, that's becoming more and more of a thing for food science, to think also about these packages and the migration of stuff out of the package into the products that consumers just don't want. So that's a good thing. That you see what happens when consciousness is and awareness is growing. You see that's reflected in the products that we see in our shops, and you vote for that product when you buy it over something that's badly packaged. And there's a lot of things like, if we don't package it in plastic, it doesn't have a long shelf life. Well, you can also ask yourself, how long do you want this cucumber to exist? I don't want it. I want to eat it now. I don't want to eat it like next month or next year. So there's certain things, fresh is fresh. And the longer, it's a beautiful product. It has wonderful hydration in it with really highly energized water. It's full of life. It's a living thing still. And you could eat that, and get all the benefits of that, huge health benefits of eating fresh stuff. And the longer it sits around, it's not getting healthier as it's sitting on the shelf. So I would say, forget the plastic. You need to eat it within a certain time frame, as fresh as possible. And don't buy it to eat it in summer, something like that.
As you were talking, I was thinking, farmers markets is a great way to pick up fresh produce without any plastic packaging that comes from fruit shops and the supermarkets. It blows my mind how much plastic packaging is in the supermarket for things that you can get in so many other places without any wrapping at all. So that could be another one. The bulk scoop bin place to get cereals and grains and nuts and seeds is a good one. There's so many things. My mind is definitely blown. I'm sure people listening, if you're still hanging in here with us, hopefully there's some good practical things that you can just start to think about to change how we do consume foods, because this is, a huge problem, something that we're only at the beginning of really understanding. And any tiny little things you can do now to reduce your exposure, I think, are going to have huge benefits later on in life.
Yeah. And I think it can be fun. I thought I don't have my own garden. That's my dream. I hope I have my own garden soon.
One day.
But I do have a balcony, and I grew all my herbs out there in pots, and I had so much fun. I thought I wanted a garden mostly because I wanted to drink rosé wine in the garden and enjoy being in there.
Also good.
But I love plants. I just got a new elan. I thought I love seeing things grow. I mean, if you have kids and you're growing carrots and then they get to pull them up, it's fun. And I think in Australia you have a lot of big backyards and you have balconies and you have wonderful weather compared to the Netherlands, certainly. And why not just try to grow something? Just start with, I don't know, your first little herb plants, a little herb garden, or plant a few hot peppers. There's so many things you could do. Balcony tomatoes. It's even a concept now. Little tiny tomatoes you can grow on your balcony. And what I find about that is it's showing yourself that you have an intention to do something a little differently. And there's so many surprises when you try a new experiment. You don't really know how it's all going to work out and if you're going to like it or not. But some things, this one really surprised me. I love doing that. And and now I really, really want to have my own garden because it's just fun. And you planted that seed, you cared for that plant, and that plant is going to care for you too. Because sometimes when I'm harvesting, I say, "Gee, I took care of you all this time. Now I'm going to eat you." But you're going to be. That's a weird thing too. Everything we eat becomes part of us.
Yeah.
The aubergine I ate yesterday is already part of Heather, so that we're really so interconnected with what we're eating. It becomes us. And if we've grown it ourselves in our own backyards, or we buy it from a farmer down the road or at the farmer's market, locally produced produce that doesn't have to travel from across the world, so it's more fresh and it doesn't have to be packaged in plastic, and it's just delicious to eat, and it's just a source of joy. And that's what we're really aiming for, I think, all of us, is how to see how jazzed up things can get and how to have a lot of fun with these things. It's not just panic mode and, oh, we've got to take all these measures and, and really make it into some sort of big impossible project. But it should be fun. You should be doing things at the right tempo for you. And if it really is sparking joy, at this thing that you said no to, because it's basically a question of saying no instead of saying yes to just whatever I always used. And just these little no's, just sprinkle the little no, I'm going to do it this way instead of that way. And just see how far you can get with that. I think you can have a lot of fun with it along the way.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Heather. Getting real nerdy. You're talking nerdy. I love it.
Yeah.
Not too nerdy, but diving into the microplastics world. I know that there's some people listening that have never even heard of it and are like, what on earth is she talking about? But we've given them hopefully a good little understanding about what it is and what the problems are, and a few tips to walk away with to think about and maybe make some change to reduce their exposure. What is next on the cards for you? What sort of nerdy research study are you cooking up now in this space?
Well, I do really want to find out exactly what we were talking about. Like, what can we do on an individual level? For many, many years, I've been talking with every level of government, all kinds of industries, and I just find, they have they have their limitations in how much they can listen and how much they can implement. Like, there's a lot of great people out there, and I really enjoyed all my interactions. But I think, what I really want to focus on is what we can do using our own individual power. And so at the individual level, not waiting for legislation, which takes years and years and years.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time.
I'm not waiting for all the science to come in, because that's going to be decades away as well before
Yeah.
we really have that all nailed down. And maybe never enough. It could be never enough for some people. They want to be more and more certain, more and more evidence, and then we'll take action. But, then we're not going to be here anymore. Some of us, it's going to take that long. So why not live the way we want to today and see how much we can be aligned with that. So what I'd like to do is show the evidence that we have so far, because we do know quite a lot. And how can we use that knowledge? It's not just what you know, it's how you use it. I really would like to give people more information that they can use in their own homes and in their own lives. And then any companies that contact me, sometimes they're doing their due diligence before they're investing in a company, because they really there's a lot of people out there with a good heart that want to do better for the environment and want to protect health. I mean, A lot of people have children. That's a big motivator to do it better, because oftentimes the children will get angry with you because they have a lot of knowledge. They're very smart. They're wonderful, how much they can teach us as well. So there's a lot of people talking about how their kids are inspiring them in their businesses to create new products and to invest in new products. So people who want to work on that, they can also contact me here in Amsterdam. I'm quite easy to find on the internet, and it's I can help with that, and that's what I'm really excited about doing. And there's a lot of measuring going on by laboratories to slowly build up our evidence base at the same time. So it's an exciting time to be alive.
Yes. I will link your website in the show notes if anybody does want to reach out or, share a cool new product idea. Maybe there's somebody listening that is very entrepreneurial that can help us in the triathlon space.
Yeah, I would love to work on that. It would require, you really have to know the area very well, and you have to kind of study it and see, because a lot of times when you're thinking, oh, I've got a solution for that, it creates a new problem, So you really have to focus on, we need to hydrate these athletes, and how can we do that? And in what sort of framework do we have to do that in? And there's always a solution. I mean, never underestimate the power of human ingenuity. When you want to do something, we can do it.
Yep. My mind already goes to making your own gels, making your own sports drinks. There are so many things you can do that you maybe haven't even considered. So thank you for opening our eyes to this area. I feel like it's the tip of the iceberg on this huge big thing, but at least we've got the ball rolling and people can start to make some change and take some action around the things that they can control in their life. So thank you so much, Heather. It's been a real treat.
Yes, I enjoyed it too. And I wish all your athletes all the best.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Heather.